Thank you. That was lovely. Reverend Paul Hasselbeck is the former Dean of Spiritual Education and Enrichment for Unity. He currently speaks and teaches around the country and serves as adjunct faculty for Unity Worldwide Spiritual Institute. He's written many books, has a weekly blog, The Absolute Word, and a nearly weekly podcast, Metaphysical Romp 2. Welcome, Reverend Paul.
Good morning. How are we doing? Wow, we're a pretty good crowd, aren't we? So I was thinking and watching as people were coming in, how weirdly we name things. So I get to spend a fair amount of time in Arizona, and they call the people who escape from the north snowbirds. But they're really not snowbirds. They're sunbirds, right? Because that's what they're going after. We're the snowbirds today, aren't we? Give ourselves a round of applause. I mean, my goodness. Wow. So what's love got to do with it? Quite a lot, actually, and maybe not in the way you think. So here we go. You ready to romp? You know, that's what I do, right? Metaphysical romps and metaphysical interpretation. Okay, so basically what we're looking at is Luke 2, 1 through 8. We know without the basics of the story, don't we? You know, Mary and Joseph go from Nazareth to Bethlehem. They're refused at the inn. They go into the stable and Jesus is born, right? That's the basic concept. So when we're talking about metaphysics and metaphysical Bible interpretation, metaphysics is basically Unity's word for our spiritual philosophy. And that's because in Unity we try to avoid some of the traditional terms like theology. Because theology is connected with words like dogma and doctrine, which we really don't have. And then metaphysical Bible interpretation is understanding a story we find in the Bible beyond its literal meaning. And what it's about is something happening in our own consciousness. So you have people, you have places, so you have people moving from place to place. So you're going to learn today, just on a very surface level, but an important level, how we use all of this to understand the story within us. Are you ready for that? Okay. So relax, my slides are available. I have an email list on the back, so if there's anything you like that you see here, you can use your camera on your phone to take a picture of it, or you can ask me for my slides. Okay, so consciousness, that annoying time between naps. Have you noticed that sometimes? Yes. You know, Snoopy was pretty wise, wasn't he? So in Unity, we say life is all about consciousness, and consciousness essentially is defined as awareness plus arousal. For years, we just talked about it being awareness. But recently, science has added arousal, which is essentially our ability to take action on what we're aware of. And so everything in my life, everything in your life that I have any degree of control over begins in my consciousness or begins in your consciousness. Have you noticed that? Yes. Have you noticed that? Yes. Okay. So we talk about three phases of mind in Unity. It's conscious phase. We're using our conscious phase now. You're consciously aware, right, of where you're seated. You are consciously aware of the snow. And then there's a subconscious phase of mind. We know we have a subconscious phase of mind because of our dreams, or when something happens and we overreact, or maybe we just know about it because someone told us. You have thoughts, ideas, and beliefs and images that you're not consciously aware of, right? Okay, and then we have this superconscious phase of mind that is this unchanging, unalterable realm that we could define as the divine or God, and it's essentially made up of principles and laws, and we name it that way because those are the things we get to consciously use. And so in the story, we have Joseph, Mary, and the baby Jesus, right? I don't know how Woodstock got chosen to be baby Jesus, but Heck, if you can take 3 ships to Bethlehem, you can have Woodstock. All right? So that's the end of the story. And in Unity Metaphysics, or metaphysical Bible interpretation, people represent thoughts and feelings. So when you're reading a story and there's people in there, they represent thoughts and feelings in your own mind, not in the mind of the characters in the story, in your mind. And in a broad way, women represent any feelings or emotions we have, and men represent any thoughts we have or our thinking nature. Now, that's not to say me as a man doesn't have feelings, or you as a woman doesn't have thoughts. This is just a way to understand the story. And so in this story we have Mary, and Mary metaphysically represents love, and we can think of that as the feeling, or we can also think of it as the principle. And it's the principle that makes love actionable. And Joseph represents wisdom, and Jesus represents the Christ principle. Are you with me? Okay. All right. So we have Joseph as wisdom, Mary as love, and the Christ principle. And what we could say is that when wisdom and love work together in our own consciousness, we can become aware of the Christ principle within us. Logical? Yeah. And then really the story that gets us here, let me go here. Let me just go back here. The story that gets us here gives us the how-to. So you ready for a how-to? Okay. So wisdom is our ability to evaluate and discern, and love is our ability to desire, to harmonize, to unify, and that always messed with people's consciousness a little bit because we're so attached to love being the feeling. But really, every feeling of love begins with desire. And in a way, our lives move from desire to desire to desire. Have you noticed that? Or if you don't like the word desire, from want to want to want. And in fact, if you have someone who is your partner that you're in love with, didn't you desire to know them first? Yes. So the reason why defining love this way is important, because when we say, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, from Scripture, well, we can almost do that, but isn't it more actionable if we just think of desiring the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul? Do you see the distinction? And does it feel more actionable like it does to me? And so that action of desire in my consciousness is what I use to have the feeling of love. And then the Christ principle. So Charles Fillmore defined the Christ principle. The Christ is the idea of man in God mind, which unfolds into the true man, and humanity is that ideal on the way to realization. So you and I are on our way to fully expressing the Christ principle. And haven't you been taught that week after week? Yes? Yeah. So this is important too, because we talk about two different things. We talk about the Christ principle, and we talk about Christ consciousness. Just as the feeling of love is expressed out of the principle of love, Christ consciousness is expressed from the principle of the Christ, which in Charles Fillmore's metaphysics was the idea of spiritual man. That in God mind there is this master idea, this archetypical idea of spiritual man. And what we're doing here is to realize that to our highest potential. So, just as men and women represent something in the Bible, so do places. Places represent states of consciousness or places of consciousness. And the overall arc of the story is about the movement from one place to another, in this case, Nazareth to Bethlehem. But in our consciousness, we're not moving from Nazareth to Bethlehem. We're moving from whatever Nazareth represents to whatever Bethlehem represents. And so, just to give you some idea, so this piece of little research just boggled my mind, that it was a 4 to 5 day trip from Nazareth to Bethlehem. Actually to Jerusalem, but Bethlehem's just like right across the valley. So a man and a pregnant woman on a donkey travel 4 to 5 days to get to Bethlehem just to have themselves registered. Pretty awesome journey when you think about it. So Nazareth metaphysically represents the commonplace or the ordinary, so it would represent your everyday, ordinary consciousness. You know what that's like, and if it's like mine, I like to think of there's my everyday wonderful consciousness that's fine and good, and then there's this other side I call my ugly twin, which is when I'm not happy and I show up in untoward ways. And then Bethlehem metaphysically represents spiritual substance, which we could think of as spiritual ideas or spiritual concepts. In a broader sense, it represents spirituality. So the fact that Mary and Joseph moved from Nazareth to Bethlehem represents a movement in our own consciousness, a raising in our own consciousness of our capacities of wisdom and love to rise up and move from the mundane level to a spiritual level. In order to bring forth the Christ principle, we must raise our faculties of wisdom and understanding from the ordinary and commonplace to the higher consciousness. So in the arc of that story, the how-to is if you want to bring forth into your awareness and develop your Christ consciousness, you at least have to be raising the overall quality, the spiritual quality of your principles of wisdom and love, which are 2 of the 12 powers. And then when we're reading the story, at least when I'm reading the story, when they said there's no room in the inn, I think of this, when it was that, something like that. This is actually an inn from Herculaneum in 70 AD. And so the inn in Bethlehem probably looks something like that. And then when you think of stable, I think that, don't you? Yes, that Jesus was born in a stable. Well, that's not what a stable was in those days. It was more like this. And the reason for that is that even though the stable was in the back, so to speak, it was the safest place to keep the most valuable things, which were the animals, because caves were protective. So when we say there was no place for them in the inn, well, an inn's a place, right? And we said places represent states of consciousness, and no room in the inn means a very full and busy place in consciousness, right? Is your everyday consciousness like that? Yeah. Right? Even in the highest spiritual state in Bethlehem, it can be pretty damn busy. Okay? And in fact, there's not room there sometimes for us to really develop that Christ principle. And so the innkeeper represents like a guiding thought or belief within you, and it does a very wise thing. In a sense, it informs my wisdom and my love, and that love and wisdom have this seed thought of the Christ principle. And what does the innkeeper say? It says, go back to the stable. So we could think of the inn as a conscious phase of mind and the stable as the back of the mind. Because it's in the back of the mind that things develop, don't they? Have you ever been working on an idea in your conscious phase of mind and you're not getting anywhere, and then you kind of put it on the back burner, okay? And then an hour later, or maybe the next day or a week later, what happens? The solution arises, right? So what the story is telling us is that in order for us to nurture and develop that Christ principle in us into the Christ consciousness, we must move from a lower state of consciousness to a higher state of consciousness. In the back of our minds, where that thought, that principle, that idea has the best chance of being developed. And then the story goes on to say, while they were there, the time came for her to deliver her child, and she gave birth to the firstborn son and wrapped him in bands of cloth and laid him in a manger. This has significance too, because a manger represents a safe and comfortable place, yes? And bands of cloth are necessary for restraint and limitation. Haven't we learned that in that restraint, especially for some children, that helps them and nurtures them? In fact, I'm really shocked by that new product on the market, the weighted blanket. Do any of you have those? I haven't gotten one yet. Yeah, but that it must feel like that. And of course, there were various animals in the story, and they represent various sense, thoughts, and feelings in our consciousness. And so, I wasn't quite ready for that. So what this represents is that in a way, for us to develop any idea, especially this Christ idea, we must kind of hold it down and limit it and restrain it in some ways so it doesn't develop too quickly and that we keep it safe. And haven't you noticed that with an ordinary idea? Sometimes I don't share that first birth of an idea with anybody because I don't want them to shoot it down. You've had that happen. Well, what are you thinking? You don't want to do that. Have you ever had that happen to you? Yeah. And so I'm closing with this favorite quote from Charles Fillmore. The mystery which hath been hid for ages and generations, which is Christ in you, your hope of glory. The Christ principle in you, your hope of glory. It's your Christ principle within you that you get to develop into your Christ consciousness and beyond that path to a higher way of living. And Charles said, in every man the Christ or the Word of God is enfolded. It is an idea that contains ideas. And Charles said, people can greatly accelerate the growth of themselves of the Christ mind by using affirmations that identify with the Christ. You guys know about affirmations. And the way we do this, we claim these affirmations not because they were true in our life right now, and not because we're going to make them true, it's because they already are in truth fundamentally true. That fundamentally at the core of your beingness is this Christ principle. You don't have to go anywhere to get it. All you have to do is learn how to consciously raise it up into something greater within yourself, some greater expression. And so Charles also said, every state of consciousness is first planted as a seed idea by some individual. And he said, when wisdom and love, Joseph and Mary, are unified in the individual consciousness, the individual is a master of ideas and bring forth under the original creative law. So what does love have to do with it? Love is a desire that we use to propel ourselves to be better. It is love working with wisdom. See, the thing is that desire without wisdom can run amok. Have you noticed that? Have you ever had your desire run away from you? Okay, so when we're working that desire with wisdom, with evaluation, with discernment, and actually we can add a third power with understanding, is when we get the best result. And when we're in that higher state of consciousness, we indeed are the master of all ideas, not only the relative ideas, but also divine ideas, the ideas that exist in divine mind. And so we can affirm this. I am the Christ idea, whole and perfect. Let's share that together. I am the Christ idea, whole and perfect. And you want to feel the truth of it. You don't want it just to be a surface thought or a Nazareth thought. You want it to be a Bethlehem thought, okay? And so we can simplify it this way. I am Christ, whole and perfect. Together, I am Christ, whole and perfect. And so you are, and so I am, and so it is. Thank you.